The air of a death world is never still. It shifts like a restless spirit, heavy with the stink of damp soil, corrosive spores, and the lingering tang of things that have long since died but still refuse to decay. To walk upon such a world is to understand that survival is not granted, nor even earned, but stolen in fleeting moments from an environment that desires nothing more than to consume you. Every breath is a gamble, every step a trespass upon a realm where man is not meant to tread. Here nature itself is not a cradle but a guillotine. Jungle vines as thick as a man's torso constrict around steel plating. The ground opens underfoot to reveal pits lined with fangs that are neither bone nor stone but some unholy amalgamation of both. Even the sky conspires against the fragile flesh of humanity, its clouds weeping acid rain and its winds carrying spores that root in lungs and bloom in days. These are the worlds the Imperium dares to call habitable, for on them, despite everything, humanity endures. But survival on a death world is more than a daily struggle against hunger and the hunt. It is a ritual of endurance, a grim ballet where death is the partner most constant, and where entire generations know no life but one lived in perpetual siege. To be born here is to inherit scars before your first breath, to learn quickly that trust is dangerous, and to measure the worth of a life, not by its length but by its stubborn refusal to yield. The Emperor's light, even if it shines faintly, becomes less a beacon of hope and more a reminder of duty, for these citizens are not simply survivors. They are the crucible from which the Imperium forges its hardest steel. To the wider galaxy they are seen as feral, savage, touched by an endless war against their environment. Yet it is precisely this crucible that produces warriors without equal. Every guardsman drawn from a death world carries not only the mark of their home upon their skin but the imprint of an existence in which compromise meant death. And so, as we step into the shadow of these planets, we will not tell of glories or victories carved into the annals of history. Instead, we will sink into the soil itself, into the trenches carved by generations who learned that prayer is breath, hunger is constant, and silence is sometimes the only shield. For, in the Imperium of man, where billions live and die unseen, the Death Worlder is a paradox. Fragile flesh wrapped around indomitable spirit, cursed by their birthright yet indispensable to the machinery of war. This is their story. This is the unending ordeal of survival where even hope has been stripped to its bone, and only defiance remains. If you find yourself drawn to this descent, into the depths of the Imperium's most unforgiving domains, if the flicker of human resilience against impossible odds strikes you as it has struck me, then remain with us. Share this journey, lend it your voice, and let it carry forward so others too may walk these darkened paths. In this endless war, even remembrance is a weapon, and your witness ensures that these stories are not lost to silence. Like, subscribe, and let the Emperor's light, faint though it may be, guide you back here, again and again. Now, let us trace the arc of our descent, through 7 stages that chart not only the struggle to endure, but the truths revealed by those who live where survival itself is heresy against nature. The ground of a death world is never truly still. To those born elsewhere, soil is a passive thing, something tilled, cultivated, broken and reshaped by the hand of man. But here, the earth itself is a predator. Each footstep is tentative, each placement of a boot a whispered prayer that the crust of ash will hold and not collapse into some hidden maw. The surface quivers under the weight of the living, responding with groans that echo like old bones under strain. And when it finally gives way, there is no warning. One heartbeat you stand upon solid ground, the next you are swallowed whole by blackness and the crunch of things that have learned to wait. Centuries in silence. The air is no less hostile. It drifts in with an acrid heaviness, thick with the perfume of rot. Fungal clouds float like drifting continents across the sky, shedding spore rain that burns the skin on contact, raising welts that fester in hours. The scent is a blend of dampness, the sweetness of decay, and something metallic like old blood left to rust upon iron. The lungs recoil at every breath, and yet breath must be taken, for silence here is not the absence of sound but the stillness of suffocation. Even as infants, the Death Worlder learns the sharp sting of air as punishment. To breathe is to hurt, but to deny breath is to die. And so endurance begins not with bravery but with that first painful gasp that sears the chest. For the children of these worlds, their cradle is no soft bedding or gentle lullaby. It is the skeletal embrace of ruins half swallowed by roots, or the dry clutch of nests carved into stone to escape predators. They do not sleep to the comfort of a mother's voice, but to the distant keening of things that prowl beyond the edge of firelight. Each shadow hints at teeth, each silence promises a sudden rush of motion. In such a place, Lullabies take the form of whispered prayers to the emperor. Promises murmured against a child's brow, not that life will be long or gentle, but that perhaps death will be merciful and swift. By adolescence, illusions have already been stripped bare, where others in the Imperium might dream of endless stars or tales of saints. The Deathworld youth dream only of making it to another sunrise. They wake with their hands already scarred from climbing walls of jagged stone to escape floods that carry not water but chittering tides of carnivorous insects. Their stomachs hollow with hunger. They gnaw on roots that taste of ash, on fungi that risk poisoning but offer one more day of movement. And when the body grows faint, when strength dwindles, they cling to a truth etched into their very marrow. Endurance is not a choice, it is a commandment. The weak are consumed, the hesitant are taken, those who falter feed the soil, and in doing so, they remind the living of the cost of slowing their pace. The first lessons of youth are carved by hunger, by pain, by loss. But none carve as deep as the first encounter with the living fury of the land itself. Imagine standing beneath trees taller than cathedrals, their roots thick enough to strangle hablots, their canopies blotting out what little sky remains visible through toxic haze. Their bark drips resin that hisses when it touches skin. You place your hand upon one trunk, hoping for stability, and the surface shudders. Not wood, not inert, but muscle hidden beneath fibrous disguise. The tree itself exhales, and from its folds erupt tendrils tipped with hooks that pierce through flesh faster than thought. Those who walk beneath such titans learn to never trust the stillness of nature, for here stillness itself is a trap. Yet amidst such terror, the people endure. They carve lives from crevices of rock, from shattered manufactorum ruins left behind by imperial expeditions long since abandoned. They learn the taste of Prometheum smoke and the comfort of iron walls, scabbed over with rust. To them, the glow of a weak lumen bulb is no mere light, but the Emperor's grace incarnate, keeping back the crawling dark. Insects batter against the glass, wings shrieking like vox static, and still the survivors huddle close, whispering liturgies of thanks for one more night where teeth did not close around them. The world conspires to erase them, and in turn, they conspire to deny it. That satisfaction. It is here that the guardsman's journey begins, not at the moment of conscription, not on the parade grounds of some scholar, but in this crucible where life is already indistinguishable from war. The Astra Militarum knows well the value of such stock. When a recruiting officer sets foot upon these worlds, when the banners of the Imperial Aquila are unfurled against skies that weep poison, there is no need for speeches or lofty promises. The people know that war awaits them. It has always awaited them. The difference is only in the uniform, in the color of ash exchanged for the olive drab of a flak jacket, in the sharpening of crude spears into bayonets affixed to lasg. They do not weep as others might when sons and daughters are taken from their families. They only nod in grim recognition, for to serve in the guard is simply to carry the same war onto a different battlefield. But before that transition comes the ritual of the first clash, the moment every child remembers for the rest of their lives. Not the first hunt, nor the first narrow escape, but the first time death takes someone de nuan does so not in the silent inevitability of the environment, but in violence sudden and undeniable. Picture a youth, little more than a boy, armed with nothing but a jagged shard of metal scavenged from a ruin. He stands with his kin, a group of 4 or 5, around a crude fire. Their laughter is brittle, strained by the hunger hollowing their cheeks. Then it comes the crash of foliage splitting, the guttural roar that shatters the night. Eyes larger than a man's skull glow with phosphorescent hate. A beast taller than a sentinel walker emerges, its hide armored in plates that shimmer with moisture. The boy lunges, because to flee is to be trampled, and his shard barely scratches. The beast does not even notice him. Instead, it plucks one of his kin from the ground, the scream ending in a crunch that will echo in his ears for the rest of his days. That is the true initiation. The realization that death is not abstract, not a threat whispered by parents to keep children close, but a reality that will strip away all that you know in an instant. It is here that hope dies, replaced with something harder, colder, and far more enduring. From that moment on, life is not measured in dreams or ambitions. It is measured in endurance. How long you can last, how much pain you can absorb, how far you can march before your legs betray you. Survival itself becomes victory. The stories of those who survive long enough to be conscripted into the Imperial Guard carry with them this origin, this marrow-deep understanding of endurance. Their comrades from hive cities or agri-worlds may struggle with the weight of discipline, with the endless hunger of campaigns, with the horror of alien predators. But to the Deathworlder, such trials are not unfamiliar. They are an extension of childhood. The mud of alien battlefields is no different than the swamp that swallowed their home. The claws of Tyranids are no more terrifying than the fanged plants that reached for them in the night. And when they march beneath the banner of the Astra Militarum, it is not with illusions of victory. It is with the grim resolve that survival itself is a triumph. Yet even here, in the cradle of their earliest days, the paradox of the Death World citizen takes shape. They are shaped by the most hostile environments known to man, broken and reforged by hunger and pain. And yet within them survives something that refuses to yield entirely to despair. For, in every whispered prayer, in every fragile spark of laughter around a fire, there is defiance. The world may strip away their flesh, their comfort, their illusions, but it cannot strip away the raw will that drives them to take one more step into the ash. One more breath of poisoned air. Ash and bone. That is what they are. Ash from the soil they tread, bone from the kin they bury, both ground together into the dust that clings to their boots as they march. And though the galaxy may never remember their names, though their sacrifices may be buried in silence, their march continues. It is the first march, the march from birth into war, and it does not end until the earth itself finally consumes them. And even then, another will rise from the ash, and the march will begin again. On a death world, the predator is not the exception, it is the rule. The laws of nature as understood elsewhere in the Imperium, the fragile equilibrium of prey and hunter, are shattered here. Balance does not exist. Predation is not a link in the chain of life, but the chain itself, wound tight around the throats of all who dwell upon such soil. Every creature that breathes is both hunter and hunted, and the thin line between those roles shifts with every heartbeat. For the human colonist, or the scavenger clinging to survival, this truth becomes apparent in the first moments of childhood. A cradle cannot be placed upon the ground without vigilance. For burrowing jaws lurk beneath the surface, scenting warmth, waiting for the tremor of movement. A family cannot keep its food in storage pits, for carrion worms will slither through the narrowest cracks to glut themselves on whatever they find. In such an environment, innocence is not merely lost early, it is forbidden altogether. The child must learn to watch the shadows, to trace every rustle of foliage, to hear in every silence the possibility of encroaching death. The predators here are not confined to a single scale or shape. They range from swarms of creatures no larger than a thumbnail, their combined venom enough to fell a bull grox in moments, to leviathans whose movement shakes mountainsides and topples forests. What unites them is an adaptation so precise, so cruel, that each seems crafted not by evolution but by malice itself. The plants, too, are complicit in this reign, for the line between flora and beasts is often meaningless. A blossom of iridescent beauty may conceal a stinger tipped with paralytic toxins. A root system may writhe like serpents, tightening around any limb foolish enough to brush against it. Even still water pools hold no mercy, for what appears as reflection hides the slick coils of ambush predators that strike upward with sudden force. To walk upon such a world is to accept that eyes are always upon you, though you may never see them. The people who grow here become experts at sensing what others cannot. They notice when the ordinary cadence of insect chatter falls abruptly silent. They feel the subtle vibration of claws pressing into soil yards away. They smelled the acrid trace of spoor faint as smoke, warning them to move before it is too late. It is not instinct alone but a cultivated awareness, trained through endless generations of attrition. Those who lack it do not survive long enough to pass on their weakness. For the predator, there is no hesitation, no morality, no calculation beyond hunger. A mother defending her child is nothing before the insatiable appetite of the world. A band of warriors bristling with spears and blades is merely an opportunity for meat gathered in bulk. The beasts do not distinguish between soldier and child, priest and heretic, noble and pauper. In this way, the death world mirrors the cold indifference of the galaxy itself. Survival is not a right, it is a theft, stolen moment by moment from an environment determined to reclaim every breath. And yet, humanity persists. They persist because to give in is to vanish without mark. Communities carve their homes into stone cliffs where predators cannot easily climb, though some grow wings. They light pyres of toxic weeds to create smokescreens that blind the many-eyed horrors prowling the dark, though the fumes scar their own lungs. They lace their crude palisades with shards of metal scavenged from ruined manufactorums, knowing it will not stop the largest beasts, but may slow them long enough to flee. Their existence is improvisation, an endless war of attrition fought not only with weapons but with wit. In the midst of this predator's reign, culture itself adapts. Songs are sung not in celebration but in warning, carrying the rhythms of danger across the night air. A low drumbeat signals a serpent beast sighting. A shrill whistle warns of carrion swarms descending. Even their prayers to the Emperor are inflected with this constant awareness of death. They do not beg for victory, for triumph is a distant dream. They ask instead for sharp eyes, for swift legs, for the clarity to notice the shadow before it falls upon them. In this way, faith itself becomes another weapon in the war for survival. The Astra Militarum understands the value of such conditioning. When regiments are raised from death worlds, they are not chosen for numbers, they are chosen for quality of endurance. A single squad of Deathworld veterans is worth thrice its weight in men drawn from softer soil. For these are soldiers who have already lived their entire lives under siege. To them, a Tyrannid Hormagaunt is but another nightmare given shape. No worse than the fang-mawed horrors that haunted their childhood. The roar of orc war engines is loud, yes, but no louder than the stampede of iron-scaled beasts that once tore through their settlements. Even Necrons, whose silent advance breaks the morale of countless regiments, find less terror here, for the Deathworlder has always known enemies that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be stopped, cannot be understood. But the price of such resilience is staggering. The Predator's reign ensures that no Deathworld ever flourishes. Populations remain low, growth checked not by want of children but by the inevitability of their loss. Each birth is celebrated as a fleeting miracle, each survival into adulthood a rarity. The Emperor's tithe takes what is left, stripping even this fragile community of its strongest and most vigilant to feed the guard. In this way, the Imperium sustains itself upon a cycle of loss. The creditors cull the weak, and the Imperium consumes the strong. For the Deathworld citizen, there is no escape. Their lives are always meat for something larger, whether beasts or empire. The Predators themselves become legend, their names whispered with a reverence equal to saints. Not reverence born of love, but of awe. The ash serpent that winds through riverbeds swallowing villagers whole when it rises. The iron maw whose bite can shear a lemon rust in two. The crow of silence whose wings blot out vox signals and whose shadow heralds mass disappearance. To an outsider, these tales sound like myth. To a Deathworlder they are geographies, warnings etched into memory as surely as the map of valleys and cliffs. To forget them is to invite death. To respect them is to endure one day longer. Even within the Predator's reign, there are moments of fragile triumph. A hunting party returns not empty-handed but dragging the carcass of a beast slain through cunning. Its hide stripped to provide armor, its flesh dried to feed the community for weeks. Children play with teeth larger than their arms. Trophies of survival displayed not as pride but as proof that humanity still resists annihilation. The fire burns bright for a night, laughter carrying against the toxic wind, and for that span of hours, they feel more than prey. They feel, fleetingly, like victors, but even as they feast, the howls in the distance remind them that the rain never ends. Tomorrow another predator will test their defenses. Tomorrow another life will be lost. For the guardsmen drawn from such soil, these lessons are carried forever. In the trenches of alien wars, when the enemy surges with unrelenting fury, they do not despair. They recognize the rhythm of predation, the familiar inevitability of jaws closing in, and with that recognition comes clarity. There is no mercy in this universe, no balance to hope for, no reprieve to earn. There is only the choice to resist, to take another breath even as the world conspires to deny it, to fire another shot even as the foe surges over the barricade, to stand even as the ground beneath you becomes ash and bone. This is the Predator's reign, a reign that does not end with the death of the beast, for another will always rise in its place. A reign that does not pause when humanity builds its walls, for teeth will find a way through. A reign that teaches the Deathworlder the hardest lesson of all, that survival is not defiance of the Predator, but coexistence with it. To live is to walk in the shadow of jaws, to hear always the scrape of claws just beyond sight, and yet, to live is also to deny the Predator total victory. So they march. Soldiers shaped by a world that sought to consume them before they could even speak. Their eyes are sharp, their senses honed, their wills hardened. The Predator's reign has stripped them of innocence, of comfort, of peace. But in its cruelty, it has given them a weapon no enemy can wholly match. The understanding that survival itself is sacred, and that every step taken under the Emperor's gaze is a triumph against a universe that wishes them gone. The Deathworlder does not fear the Predator's reign. They are its product, its child, its reluctant heir. And as long as they endure, as long as their boots strike against the poisoned soil, the reign remains unbroken, and humanity remains unextinguished. On a death world, hunger is not an inconvenience. It is not the rumble of an empty stomach before a meal, nor the impatience of a worker whose ration line runs too long. Hunger here is a constant, a presence that coils through every hour of life. It gnaws from within and presses from without, for the world itself conspires to starve those who cling to it. The soil is treacherous, poisoned by centuries of corruption or warped by alien toxins. Crops fail before they rise. A stalk might bear fruit, only to wither in the night from unseen parasites burrowing into its roots. Groves that once promised harvest turn out to be traps, their blossoms exhaling clouds of spores that choke lungs and rot flesh. What food nature provides is not freely given but violently contested. To bite into the flesh of a hunted beast is to risk venom, parasites, or hidden toxins. And yet the people do so because there is no alternative. The ration lines that exist are pitiful mockeries of sustenance. Measured handfuls of nutrient paste, stale corpse starch, or dried fungal slabs are doled out by the ration keepers' grim men and women, who know that they carry death in their hands with every choice they make. They cannot feed everyone. They never can. Families wait with hollow eyes, knowing that the youngest may eat while the oldest go without, or that the strongest are chosen over the frail, because strength is more valuable to survival than mercy. In these moments, the cruelty of the world is mirrored by the cruelty of necessity, for hunger strips away not only flesh but also the bonds that might otherwise hold communities together. The Astra Militarum does not ignore this truth when it comes to conscription. They understand well that hunger shapes the human spirit as profoundly as any weapon. To march a regiment raised from a death world is to command soldiers who have already lived through deprivation, who have already fought for every scrap of nourishment since the moment they could walk. A guardsman who has endured the gnawing void of hunger will not falter when supply lines fail. They will chew on boot leather, on weeds, on the flesh of fallen foes if they must. They do not call it desperation, they call it living as they always have. But hunger is not merely physical, it is spiritual. The hollow hunger that defines these worlds seeps into the soul, creating a void that no ration, no feast, no moment of plenty can truly fill. To live in a state where every morsel is uncertain is to become haunted, always waiting for the return of emptiness, even in rare times of abundance. When a beast has been slain and its carcass yields weeks of food, or when off-world tithe shipments arrive unspoiled, the people gorge with fear. They eat not for satisfaction, but in anticipation of the hunger that will inevitably return, and when it does, it feels worse than before. For the memory of fullness sharpens the edge of emptiness. This cycle shapes culture as profoundly as any predator's fangs. Families tell stories not of heroes who slew monsters, but of ancestors who found sustenance where none thought possible. Songs are not about victory, but about survival through famine. Entire rituals develop around food blessings whispered before each bite, prayers over empty bowls, offerings made not to gods of plenty, but to the god Bemperor, that he might allow them one more day of endurance. For the death worlder, a meal is not nourishment, it is liturgy. Each mouthful is sacred, each swallow a small miracle. The body itself twists under the rule of the hollow hunger. Children grow lean and wiry, their ribs pressing against skin, their muscles hardened not by training but by scarcity. Their eyes sharpen, their reflexes quicken. Because hunger teaches speed, the speed to seize a scrap before another hand takes it. The speed to spot edible growth before the poisonous flora claims it. Even their metabolisms adapt, burning slow, conserving energy, making a kind of living symbiosis with starvation itself. When such individuals are drawn into the Imperial Guard, they are seen as tireless, able to march further on less than their comrades. But the truth is darker. They are not tireless. They are simply accustomed to exhaustion. Their normal is already the edge of collapse. Hunger also breeds suspicion. Communities fracture over scraps, and alliances are forged not in kinship but in exchange of food. Trust becomes scarce, for the gnawing void in one's belly can turn even a brother into a rival. Parents guard meals from children until the right time, fearing that an unmeasured feast now will mean death tomorrow. Leaders rise not through eloquence, but through the ability to secure calories for their followers. Where other worlds speak of politics or ideology, death worlds know only hunger's hierarchy. The strong or cunning eat, and in return their followers endure another day. And yet, as much as hunger strips away, it also binds. Shared famine creates solidarity, a communal understanding that all are equal before the void. When a village huddles together, splitting the last dried strip of meat into slivers so small they scarcely touch the tongue, there is a unity there that no abundance could produce. The people learn to see not the absence but the endurance, to find pride in the act of not breaking under starvation's weight. To them, survival itself is victory, and the hollow gnawing inside is a badge of that victory. They are still alive. They are still human. The predators have not taken them, nor has hunger, not yet. The Guard understands this as well, though in its own cold, bureaucratic way. Commissars see it in the eyes of Deathworld conscripts, who do not flinch when rations are cut or when the supply chain collapses in the midst of war. These soldiers accept deprivation not as punishment, but as familiarity. They may murmur prayers, they may grumble, but they do not despair. Despair requires the memory of plenty, and they have none. Hunger is their birthright, and so it cannot break them. But there is another edge to this blade, one the Imperium seldom acknowledges. Hunger breeds rage, not the theatrical fury of warriors in song, but a slow, simmering hatred that builds with every empty stomach, every child buried, every harvest stolen by soil that yields only poison. The hollow hunger becomes not merely a condition, but an enemy. Some Deathworlders direct that rage outward, into the guns they lift against orcs, tyrannids, or heretics. Others turn it inward, toward their own rulers, their own overseers, whispering treason in the shadows of famine. It is no accident that uprisings often begin in the ration lines. When deprivation becomes so great that obedience is no longer sustainable, still, most endure. They endure because hunger has taught them that survival is never guaranteed, that tomorrow is never promised, that even rebellion may end only in more starvation, and so they cling to existence, hollow but unbroken. They march beneath the banners of the Guard, their bellies empty but their lasguns steady, their souls gnawed by hunger but their resolve unyielding. For them, the hollow inside is not a weakness. It is proof that they can suffer and yet persist, proof that they can be denied every comfort and yet still stand. This is the hollow hunger, a reign not of beasts or predators, but of absence itself. It devours flesh without teeth, hope without claws. It is patient, inexorable, eternal, and yet, in its cruelty, it forges a people unlike any other, a people who know that to eat is divine, to survive is sacred, and to endure one more day is the greatest rebellion against a galaxy that would see them starved into extinction. Faith on a death world is not a cathedral with golden spires, nor is it a priest intoning words in the safety of a shrine. Faith here is born in darkness, in whispers, in the half-light of survival. It is not ceremony, but necessity, a ritual that binds together lives stretched thin by suffering. Where hunger gnaws and predators stalk, where every day is purchased with pain, faith is not a choice. It is the only weapon against despair. The God Emperor is spoken of not in grand proclamations, but in hushed invocations, muttered before sleep, or whispered as children clutch scraps of food to their lips. They do not see him in marble statues or stained glass, but in the smallest mercies, a rainstorm that washes poison from a stream, a trap that snares more than vermin, a night in which the beasts do not come. Each of these is marked as his will, a sign that he has not forgotten them entirely. For the people of Deathworlds, the Emperor's gaze is imagined not as a beacon of light, but as a shadow that passes overhead, pausing just long enough to shield them for another day. The rituals are simple, born not from the liturgies of the ecclesiarchy, but from need. A mother breathes the Emperor's name over her child's fever, offering him not cure but the endurance to survive until dawn. Hunters carve crude aquillas into the bark of trees before entering a toxic marsh, hoping that faith will see them back alive. Even soldiers raised from these worlds carry the practice with them, murmuring half-remembered chants before battle, trusting not in polished sermons but in the inherited rhythm of whispered devotion. Faith is carried like a talisman, worn not on chains of gold but in the heart, where it cannot be taken even when everything else is stripped away. But faith here is not purely pious. It is pragmatic. The ecclesiarchy calls him the master of mankind, the Omnissiah's reflection, the divine protector. On Deathworlds, he is simply the one who decides whether you live or die. His name is invoked as much in desperation as in reverence. Emperor, let me live one more day. Emperor, do not let my child starve. Emperor, blind the beast before it finds me. These are not lofty prayers, but raw bargains. Faith is not a comfort, it is a negotiation with survival itself. In this way, shadows and silence become holy. Entire communities build their rights around concealment, because to live is to hide from beasts, from famine, from the endless dangers of their home. Candles are lit not for illumination but as a ward against darkness, the flame believed to draw the Emperor's gaze to their hiding places. Silence, too, is sacred. To speak too loudly risks death. and so the act of keeping quiet is elevated into ritual. Families sit in stillness before meals, not daring to disturb the sacred silence that is itself their shield. Faith is not only in the words whispered but in the restraint of unspoken ones. Deathworld faith is also steeped in blood. When the ground yields nothing but poison, sacrifice becomes its own form of offering. Some clans bleed into the earth before planting their meager crops, believing that life may grow only when purchased with life. Hunters smear their own blood on the tips of their weapons before facing predators, offering themselves in exchange for strength. The ecclesiarchy often condemns such practices as superstition, yet they persist, because on worlds where survival is fragile, any gesture that promises the Emperor's attention cannot be abandoned. This devotion, born in shadows, does not weaken when carried into the ranks of the Astra Military. If anything, it grows sharper. Guardsmen from death worlds do not scoff at battlefield chaplains, nor do they require ornate sermons to ignite their faith. Their belief is already carved into them by suffering. A whispered prayer before a Lasgun volley, a hidden aquila scratched into the dirt of a trench, a silent vow before charging into the guns of the enemy. These are the marks of their devotion. They may not know the litanies by heart, but they know what it means to trust in something greater than their own strength. And yet, within this shadowed faith lies a paradox. The Emperor is worshipped as savior, but he is also feared as judge. To falter is to invite his wrath, to die not as martyr but as failure. This fear binds them tightly to obedience. Even when commissars raise their pistols, even when commanders send them into hopeless charges, they whisper the Emperor's name and march forward, because to refuse would be to declare oneself unworthy of his gaze. Death is inevitable, but dishonest honor is eternal. In this, the Imperium finds its most unbreakable servants, soldiers who fight not for glory, not even for hope, but for the desperate faith that the Emperor will see their sacrifice and grant it meaning. But the shadows of faith are not always pure. Rumors whisper of death worlds where faith has warped, where the people mistake the hunger of chaos for the hunger of survival, where blood sacrifices spill into rituals that no longer honor the Emperor. The ecclesiarchy stamps out such cults with fire, but the whispers remain. When faith is forged in desperation, it can bend. When survival is a prayer, it is all too easy for that prayer to be answered by darker powers. The people do not always know the difference, and in their hunger for salvation, they may embrace damnation. Still, for the majority, the God Emperor remains the sole anchor. In the silence of the night, when the sounds of predators prowl the dark, when children whimper from hunger, when the very air seems to press against lungs with poisonous weight, his name is the last refuge. To whisper Emperor, protect us is to push back against the void itself. That whisper may not stop the beast, nor fill the belly, nor bring rain to poisoned ground, but it gives courage, and sometimes courage is enough. For faith in shadows does not promise triumph, it does not promise victory. What it offers is endurance, the knowledge that even in the deepest night, even when all seems lost, the act of believing itself becomes defiance. And on a death world, where everything conspires to erase human life, defiance is the only form of victory that matters. This is why Deathworlders march so faithfully beneath the banners of the Imperium, not because they expect reward, nor because they dream of peace. They march because they believe that to give up would be to betray the shadowed faith that has carried them this far. They march because silence has become sacred, and obedience has become survival. They march because, in the end, their faith is not in salvation, but in endurance. Faith in shadows, fragile, desperate, unadorned, yet in its frailty lies its strength. For no golden cathedral, no jeweled altar, no oration of priests can match the power of a whispered prayer, spoken in the darkness by someone who has nothing left but the will to endure. On a death world, survival is not a contest with the environment alone. It is a battle against predators that have been shaped by millennia of cruelty, creatures honed by nature into instruments of perfect violence. Yet as much as the people fear the beasts that stalk them from the forests, the swamps, and the skies, there are darker predators still, those that lurk within the human soul. The beasts without are merciless, the beasts within are unrelenting. Both leave scars that no flesh can heal. Every death world has its monsters. Some are vast and grotesque, towering over the trees with jaws like siege engines and hides so thick that lost fire barely scorches their flesh. Others are subtle, lurking in shadowed crevices or moving silently beneath poisoned rivers, waiting for the foolish or the desperate to stray too close. Some take the skies, their wings blotting out what little sun dares pierce the clouds, their cries echoing like banshees. All are born of an ecosystem where weakness does not survive. For the people, these creatures are not myth but constant presence, a threat as familiar as hunger, as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. Children grow up learning not songs of joy but warnings carved into memory. Do not linger where the vines drip with moisture, for the tendrils themselves will tighten around your throat. Do not drink from the pools that shimmer with beauty, for their waters carry a sweetness that kills. Do not step where the earth seems solid but is not, for it will swallow you into the layers of things that feed on flesh. Each rule is a prayer disguised as advice, each cautionary tale a hymn of survival. In time, fear becomes instinct. The people do not marvel at the predators that stalk them, they endure them, they adapt. They grow silent and cunning in their presence, yet no matter how carefully they move, the beasts claim their tithe. A hunter vanishes into the night, and his screams are heard only once. A child disappears into the brush, leaving behind nothing but torn cloth and silence. Entire groups are sometimes devoured in an instant when a predator bursts from concealment, its hunger unquenchable. The people do not build monuments to these losses. They do not speak the names aloud. To remember too vividly is to invite despair. Instead, they whisper to the emperor, offering the souls of the devoured in exchange for one more day of life. But even as these external beasts ravage their bodies, another kind of predator stalks within. Hunger itself becomes an animal, driving people to choices they would never otherwise make. Families fracture when food runs too thin. Neighbors turn upon one another, their eyes hollow, their hands trembling with desperation. There are tales spoken only in the deepest secrecy of cannibal feasts in the darkest winters, when survival demanded that the dead not be buried but consumed. Such acts are condemned, cursed, and hidden from sight, yet none can swear with certainty that they would not do the same. If hunger sank its claws deeply enough into their bellies, fear, too, becomes a beast. It coils inside the mind, whispering that to abandon others is the only way to live. It urges the weak to flee when unity could save them, or to betray companions to predators in exchange for a moment's reprieve. On death worlds, cowardice is not rare. It is simply punished swiftly, for the group cannot afford weakness. A single moment of faltering courage can doom them all, and so the community becomes its own beast, tearing apart those who fail to carry their weight. Justice is swift and merciless because mercy is indistinguishable from death. Among the Astra Militarum, those raised from death worlds carry these scars. They are fearless in the face of monstrous Xenos, not because they lack fear, but because fear has become a lifelong companion. When a tyrannid charges with talons gleaming, they see only another predator, larger than most, but no less mortal. When orcs roar across the battlefield, they hear echoes of the beasts that have stalked them since childhood. They know how to move silently, how to vanish into terrain, how to strike with patience and precision, but they also carry the inner beasts with them, the hunger, the paranoia, the instinct to sacrifice others for survival. Commissars and chaplains watch them closely, aware that under the strain of war, the beasts within may rise again, and yet, this very duality makes them invaluable. Where others might falter, they endure. Where others hesitate before horrors, they strike. Deathworlders fight not with illusions of glory, but with the hardened knowledge that monsters can be killed if one is willing to bleed long enough. Their faith is not in triumph, but in attrition, in lasting one moment longer than the enemy, no matter the cost. The Imperium exploits this mercilessly, throwing them against horrors that would shatter lesser men, knowing they will fight because fighting is all they have ever known. The beasts without and within are reflections of one another. The predator in the swamp is merciless, but so too is the hunger in a mother's eyes when she weighs the life of her children against the life of a stranger. The winged horror that swoops from the sky is terrifying, but so too is the rage that erupts when a man discovers his meager hoard of food has been stolen. Both kinds of beasts leave the same mark, a human heart that beats harder, colder, more ruthless, a spirit that accepts cruelty not as aberration but as law. But there is also resistance. In the face of monsters without and within, some choose not to surrender their humanity entirely. They find ways to soften the edges, to hold on to fragments of kindness. A hunter may share his catch even when hunger claws at his belly. A mother may refuse to eat though her body starves, giving every morsel to her child. Soldiers may throw themselves before comrades to shield them, dying not from compulsion but from choice. These moments are rare, fragile, and fleeting. Yet they are what keep the people from becoming indistinguishable from the beasts they battle. The ecclesiarchy calls death worlds cursed, and perhaps they are. Yet in that curse lies a truth the wider Imperium too often forgets. Humanity is tested not in prosperity but in desperation. It is in the face of beasts, both external and internal, that the human soul is laid bare. Some fall, some resist, most exist somewhere in between, enduring with a faith both desperate and unbreakable. For the beasts without will always hunger, and the beasts within will always whisper. The only question is which one the people choose to feed. And on a death world, choice itself is a luxury. More often, survival makes the choice for them. V. Madness is a quiet contagion on a death world. It does not always scream or rave. More often, it whispers. It erodes, grain by grain, until a person wakes one morning and realizes they no longer know if the shadows in the tree line are real, or if the voice that urged them to run belonged to their own mind. Sanity is a fragile flame here, guttering in the endless winds of hunger, fear, and exhaustion. To keep that flame alive is perhaps the greatest struggle of all. The environment conspires against the mind. The forests grow too thick, every tree resembling the next, until direction dissolves into repetition. The swamps echo strangely, each splash magnified until it seems footsteps surround you. Even the sky, often choked by ash or poisoned fog, denies the mind a point of reference. In such landscapes, men and women begin to doubt not only what they see, but whether sight itself can be trusted. They move in circles, convinced they are advancing. They hear companions calling their names when those companions have long been dead. They startle awake in the night, certain something has been gnawing at their limbs, only to find nothing but their own trembling hands. Sleep offers no refuge. Dreams are poisoned by memory, by the sight of kin being devoured, by the endless hunger that gnaws like rats at the bones. Some never wake fully. They wander in a haze, half dreaming even in the daylight, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving in silent conversation with phantoms. In such states, reality itself becomes slippery. A man may fire upon his own companion, believing them a predator in disguise. A woman may wander into the jaws of a beast because she thought it was her mother's embrace. Madness is not simply a private affliction. It is a contagion that can drag whole groups to ruin. Communities fight back against it with ritual. In the hives of more fortunate worlds, ritual is spectacle, banners and processions and gilded altars. On death worlds, it is far more humble. A handful of words whispered together before sleep. The etching of the Imperial Aquila into the dirt with a stick before setting out. A small flame lit with precious promethium, not for warmth, but to remind the mind that fire still obeys, that some things remain real and dependable. Faith becomes the tether to sanity. Without it, the line between human and madman frays until it snaps. Yet even faith is not unshakable. There are moments when the silence of the Emperor feels too vast, when the whispered prayers seem to vanish into void. On those nights, despair takes on a shape. Some claim to hear the growl of beasts outside their huts when no beast is there. Others swear the Emperor speaks, but his words are twisted, commanding them to kill their own to prove their loyalty. Whether such visions are madness, chaos, corruption, or simply the brain's final convulsions, none can say. What is known is that those who fall too far cannot be allowed to remain. A community already drowning in peril cannot afford the mad to sow further danger. Exile is common, though the line between exile and execution is vanishingly thin. Among the Deathworld regiments are prized for their endurance, yet their fragility of mind is often overlooked until it breaks upon the battlefield. Surrounded by the thunder of artillery and the endless howls of alien predators, some fall back into the patterns of their childhood terrors. They freeze, they mutter, they lash out at shadows. Commissars understand this weakness all too well, and though their bolt pistols are trained to maintain discipline, they also serve to silence the broken before panic spreads. The guard is a machine, and madness is rust. It must be cut away quickly, without hesitation. Still, there are those who resist, who cling to sanity with a tenacity as fierce as any predator's bite. They invent stories for their children to anchor them, not of monsters but of heroes who once walked the same poisoned soil and prevailed. They share small acts of tenderness, a hand upon a shoulder, a ration divided in half. They invent traditions, counting stars, naming storms, weaving patterns into the dirt. These fragile things may seem meaningless to outsiders, but on a death world, they are lifelines. They are the threads that keep minds from unraveling entirely. There are also those who channel their madness into something useful. A man who claims to see the future may, in his delirium, sharpen the vigilance of his tribe, making them more cautious. A woman who speaks to voices only she can hear might also invent strategies no sane mind would dare, sometimes winning battles against the beasts that stalk them. The line between prophet and lunatic is blurred. Perhaps it has always been. Even the ecclesiarchy, when they visit, sometimes choose not to denounce such figures, Better a false saint than no saint at all. Better a madwoman who inspires courage than silence that breeds despair. Madness, in truth, is not an exception, but a constant companion. All who live on these worlds walk along the edge of that cliff. Some slip, some claw their way back, some embrace the fall. The difference is not one of strength or weakness alone, but of circumstance, of who still has something left to hold on to. A child's face, a relic passed down through generations, a single phrase of liturgy that still sparks warmth in the cold. Perhaps this is why the Imperium values Deathworlders so highly in war, not because they are unbreakable, but because they are already broken, and have learned to keep moving anyway. They have stared into the abyss of their own minds and found a way to step back, or at least to pretend to. In the furnace of battle, that skill is worth more than any natural bravery. For what is bravery, if not madness refined into usefulness? But even in their endurance, there is tragedy. The survivors are never truly whole. They carry with them voices that will not fall silent, memories that repeat in endless cycles, paranoia that never loosens its grip. They may win the day, they may even live to old age, but their nights are haunted. They stare into fires too long. They flinch at laughter. They mistrust kindness. The line of sanity they walk is never far from collapsing beneath their feet. On death worlds, the people do not ask for peace of mind. They do not dream of clarity. They ask only for another day when they can still distinguish between what is real and what is not. For in that fragile distinction lies their survival, and without it, they are already dead. And so they whisper prayers, not just to the Emperor of mankind, but to themselves, reminders that they still exist, that the world around them is still there, that the beasts without are real and the beasts within are illusions. Sometimes it is enough, sometimes it is not, but they whisper all the same, clinging to sanity as though it were the last weapon left in their hands, because in truth, it is. There are few true dawns upon a death world. The rising of the sun does not bring warmth or hope. It reveals only the stark reality of what has survived the night, and what has not. To call it a dawn is an act of defiance, an insistence that even on the most forsaken worlds of the Imperium, some rhythm of life still persists, even if that rhythm is made of hunger, struggle, and loss. The last chapter of the Deathworld story is not one of triumph or release, but of the eternal cycle that repeats. Unbroken across centuries, the final dawn begins as the others do with silence, broken by the cries of beasts and the groaning of the earth itself. Communities emerge from their hovels, clutching makeshift tools and weapons, the ash of yesterday's fires still clinging to their faces. Children peer into the dim light with eyes already too old, already accustomed to fear. The air is thick with smoke, or spores, or toxic winds that rasp against the throat, reminding each breath-taker that survival itself is rebellion. These people do not live, they endure. They measure their lives not in years, but in the number of times they have awoken when others did not. Yet there is something more profound in this endurance. The people of these worlds know with an intimacy that others cannot, that the Imperium itself is fragile. Every dawn is bought at cost. Every day survived is stolen from jaws that would have gladly consumed it. To wake on such a world is to know the price of existence and blood, and it is to understand that nothing is eternal, save the need to fight for one more hour. The Imperium does not mourn these lives. Administratum records rarely bother to note the fate of those born and buried on such hostile soil. Entire generations vanish into silence, unremarked by historians or scribes. Regiments raised from these worlds fight and die in distant campaigns, their banners lost, their names unremembered, their blood absorbed into the endless mud of alien soil. To the galaxy at large, the Deathworlder is a footnote, a brief mention in a campaign log. But within that obscurity lies something paradoxically eternal. They endure not for glory, but because survival itself is the only victory. At the edge of every village, at the boundaries of every ruined settlement, there is always a horizon stained with fire. Forests burn, swamps fester, skies storm with ash, and the night brings predators whose jaws could swallow a man whole. Against this backdrop, the people kindle their fires, etch their prayers, and take their meager meals. This is not resilience born of choice, but of necessity. Yet in necessity there grows a strange strength, a kind of grim nobility that the wider Imperium depends upon but rarely acknowledges. For if a man or woman can survive the final dawn on a death world, then they can survive anything. Sanctity, when it is spoken of here, is not found in cathedrals or spires. It is found in the act of standing, of placing one foot in front of the other despite the wounds, despite the madness, despite the certainty of eventual death. The people look upon their children and know with brutal clarity that most will not see adulthood. They bury their kin with no promise of peace, for even the graves are not safe from the scavengers that claw and dig. But still they rise, still they march, still they whisper prayers to the God Emperor, hoping against reason that his gaze will fall for a heartbeat upon their suffering and grant them a moment's reprieve. And sometimes, just sometimes, it does. There are stories told by the fire of impossible survival, of men and women who walked through storms of toxin or clawed their way out of the bellies of beasts. Such stories are not considered exaggeration but miracles, signs that the Emperor himself has brushed against mortal flesh. However briefly, these stories do not soften the truth of life, but they lend a fragile light to it, a shard of belief sharp enough to pierce the darkness. But the final dawn is not only the story of mortals, it is also the story of the land itself. Death worlds are not passive places. They are not stages upon which humanity enacts its tragedies. They are predators in their own right, patient, eternal, and hungering. The jungles regrow after fire, the swamps reclaim the ruins, the skies churn with new poisons. The people believe, with good reason, that their worlds are alive in ways more malign than natural. Some whisper that their planets themselves resent humanity's presence, that they seek to expel the invaders with tooth, claw, and storm. Such whispers are never recorded, but they spread in silence all the same, for no man can watch a jungle hunt him and believe it is merely coincidence. Thus, the final dawn is also the dawn of the world itself, each day a fresh attempt by the land to rid itself of the interlopers who dare call it home. Humanity may win battles, may burn swathes of forest or slay the great beasts that stalk the night, but the world is patient. It waits, it grows, it returns. Against such relentless hunger, humanity's only weapon is persistence. This cycle of predator and prey becomes the rhythm of life. It shapes the minds of the people, carving deep furrows of suspicion, endurance, and fatalism. They do not dream of victory, because victory is a lie on a death world. They dream only of another dawn, and when that dawn comes, they take it as both miracle and curse. Miracle, for they have survived again. Curse, for it means the struggle continues, unending. That it is this paradox that defines them. To survive is to endure pain beyond measure. To perish is to vanish, forgotten, erased. Both are unacceptable, yet both are inevitable. The final dawn, then, is not a single day, but the endless repetition of this truth until the last breath is drawn. The Astra Militarum knows this. That is why Deathworld regiments are so feared by their enemies and so respected by their allies. These soldiers do not falter when the ground quakes or the sky burns. They do not waver when Xenos monstrosities charge, or when chaos demons manifest in fire and corruption. They have already lived their whole lives on the edge of annihilation. War is simply a continuation of their childhood, writ larger. For them, every battlefield is just another death world with a different face, and so they march, unyielding, until they fall. Yet even among them, the cost cannot be hidden forever. The hollow eyes, the thousand-yard stares, the silence that falls too often between words, these are the marks of the final dawn etched into the soul. Victory, when it comes, tastes like ashes. Peace, when it is promised, feels like betrayal, for they know too well that no peace can last. And yet, they fight, not for peace, not for triumph, but for endurance, for the survival of humanity, for the endless march that must continue until the stars themselves burn out. The final dawn is, in truth, the truest symbol of the Imperium of man. It is not a dawn that promises beauty or hope. It is not a dawn that leads to brighter days. It is a dawn that strips away all illusions, leaving only the raw fact of survival. And perhaps, in that brutal honesty, it is more sacred than any golden promise. For, in the end, the Deathworlder's story is the Imperium's story, a tale of countless lives endured, sacrificed, and forgotten, all so that the species may persist one day longer. The final dawn is not an ending, it is the continuation, the unbroken march, the eternal reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no respite, no peace, no release. There is only survival, only war, only the dawn that comes again and again, demanding its toll in blood. And as the sun rises once more over poisoned swamps, jagged mountains, and endless plains of ash, the people stir. They take up their weapons, they whisper their prayers, they step into the light, knowing it may be their last. This is the final dawn, not because it ends, but because it never does. It is the dawn that repeats for eternity, each one final, each one endless, and in its shadow, humanity persists. Because to stop is to die, because to rest is to vanish, because the march must continue.